If you enjoyed the Prestige F4.9, the first of the brand's next generation flybridge cruisers, and frankly, why wouldn't you, then we've got a major treat for you here today. We've come to Beaulieu-sur-Mer, just a few miles east of Nice, to check out this, the new flagship of that next generation line, the Prestige F5.7. Now, as luck would have it, we've got one of those original Prestige F4.9s sitting right here, directly alongside the new 5.7. And although they share plenty of design principles in common, one thing you'll see that differentiates them at the aft end is the styling. Now, here on the new boat, we've got this rather swish mirrored glass at the back end of the cockpit. Some quality steelwork here as well, and the brand name emblazoned on that. Over on the 4.9, things are a great deal plainer. So it's obvious that this larger 5.7 is designed to feel a little bit more premium. And as we work our way around the boat, you'll also see that a lot of those design principles I've mentioned, though effective on the 4.9, are just that bit more effective on this new boat because of the extra beam, the extra length and the extra elevation. But let's start at the aft end with the swim platform. Now, this high-low platform is strong enough to handle 350 kilos, so Prestige recommends the Highfield 360 as a tender. As you can see, we've got a telescopic ladder drops down into the water if you prefer to use it for water sports. The back end here, though, is symmetrical. So we have a good storage section in the center, which is particularly voluminous actually on the starboard side. And we have evenly spaced steps on both sides of that central parapet. On the starboard side, if I lift that up, you'll see that that's used for the shore power. That's neatly tucked away. There's a telescopic passerelle above that, so you can safely access the pontoon. And we also have this, the transom shower mounted into that moulding. And it's not your average transom shower either. Very swanky piece of kit that is. Let's move around to the port side. You'll see we've got a little window down here, a little port light, and that gives the game away because this, just like the smaller 4.9, houses a little crew cabin, a transverse crew cabin back here. You can spec that as a storage space instead if you prefer, which means you basically don't have the toilet or the mattress, but it would seem like false economy, to be honest, because even rigged like this, with the bed in place and the sink, the vanity unit, the toilet there, you can still use it very profitably as a storage space. So it makes good sense to spec it either way. Of course, there's no window back here. We're limited to that port light we've already mentioned because we do have that storage built into the back end there just next to the swim platform. But it's a pretty decent space. And whether you choose to take crew or not, and to be honest, very few people will on a boat of this scale, it's a useful asset in terms of storage and also in terms of access to the toilet, should you want to stay out in this part of the boat instead of heading forward and down to the dayheads. Well, let's close that up and take a look at the rest of the cockpit, because this, again, follows those design principles laid down by the smaller 4.9. We have facing settees here and that open transom at the back end, so you've got good views aft. There is an option here. You can trade these units for a moulded bench along the back end that faces forward in the more traditional fashion. But everybody seems to be speccing these days, and it makes good sense to do so on this boat too, because as on the 4.9, we've got that ocean view galley, which is basically a galley at the back end of the saloon there that straddles the space between the seating area forward and the seating area in this open aft cockpit. It's a good little section. It's sunken, as you can see, and that brings your eye level pretty much exactly where the eye level of those seated forward in this saloon will be. So that makes good sense. And if we look aft through this space, well, at the moment we've got a view of the marina, but you can see why they call it the ocean view galley. Integration with that aft deck is fantastic. But let's pop back out, because there's more to talk about out here. If we just move over to the port side and show you the shape of the 4.9's cockpit, you'll see that the extra beam here is very well used. On the port side, we've got a little bit of space here. If I lift that up, you'll see we've got a little wet bar, a bit of storage underneath, but I would assume that you could fit a fridge in here should you want to. on the other side, we've got a unit of similar size, this time with the third helm, a little joystick right here on the starboard side at the back of the boat with a good view of the boat's parameters for easy parking. Again, more storage beneath there, but again, I would assume if you want a fridge or an ice maker, that wouldn't be a problem. And another way in which this cockpit benefits from that extra space is simply in terms of the extra deck you get. So we've got a little companionway aft of this seating. You could easily fit another couple of freestanding chairs here, and you could do the same forward. So rather than the 4-man seating section you have on the 4.9, you could realistically fit 6 to 8 people around this table, no problem at all. It's a major bonus. The engine bay is accessed at the leading edge of the cockpit, and it really is very easy to access indeed. Nice big aperture, well arranged ladder, excellent ergonomics here, and the reason for that is because in classical Prestige fashion there are no engine options. What you get are these IPS-800s or a pair of D8-600s, and the engine bay is designed around those, so it absolutely shows. If you move aft, you'll see we've got a set of jack shafts here, just so we can move the engines forward to maintain optimum weight distribution. And on some boats, that would involve a substantially increased cabinet, a larger engine bay, which increases reverberation, spoils refinement. But we've got a rigid bulkhead framing those jack shafts back there, and it's very well insulated too. So refinement ought to be pretty decent. As I say, ergonomics are bang on though. What we have over here on the starboard side is the calorifier back there. Whole load of electronics and electrics gear on the starboard side. Fantastic access to your filters and your servicing points on both sides, of course. In the centre here, we've got your seakeeper and your generator. And on the port side, very much needed on a day like today, is the air conditioning unit working overtime. And there's another bonus to be had up at the bow, and we'll make our way up there right now. We'll take the starboard side deck. There's a diesel filler under there. Same on the other side for a pair of 1100 litre tanks. Nice elevated stainless steel rails here. And this deck, incidentally, though it looks quite a lot like teak, it's actually Irocco mixed with resins to really harden it up, make it hard wearing. It looks and feels really quite superb, and it's not too hot at all in the sunlight. Up another step there, here's the traditional Prestige side door. We'll take a look at that when we get into the saloon. And here's a little side gate too, just a lifting bar so you can step across onto a neighbouring boat or onto the pontoon. And as we move forward, this is another element that's pretty unique to this Prestige F-Class. Not 1 or 2, not 3, but 4 steps up onto a very substantially raised bow section. And the principle there is that we can put the owner's cabin down in there without forcing it to suffer from the tapering of the hulls V, and we'll see what that's all about when we go down below. In the meantime, let's take a look at this foredeck, because as I say, this is a major step up over the 4.9. As on the 4.9, you get permanent skylights to admit a bit of light down below, plus cup holders and guardrails, a nice big central island sunbed with a couple of backrests that you can lift into place just to make yourself more comfortable. But this is really what it's all about on this 5.7. We've got space here, sufficient length for a really good size of bow lounge. Big enough, I would say, for between 4 and 6 people. And that's a major bonus, particularly when you're berthing stern to in the Mediterranean and you really want to escape the party and have a drink or a meal in privacy. It's a fantastic spot, and it doesn't in any way obstruct the operation of your anchoring or your seamanship duties. Now let's make our way back aft down the port side this time. As we do so, you'll notice we've got receptacles in the deck for a sunshade, just to provide a little bit of shelter up here on the bow. More elevated guardrails, as you can see. As we take a step down, it's interesting. It's almost trawler style, the way the flybridge flares as you move aft and begins to provide proper shelter for these side decks. It's still a very elegant, quite low profile looking boat, but that little trawler style overhang certainly doesn't hurt at all. There's the other diesel filler down below, and this is quite interesting too. This is what they call a fashion panel. The basic principle, as you can see on the 4.9 as well, is that they take the Prestige logo, backlight it with LEDs, pop it on a faceted panel like this, and at night it's supposed to look absolutely superb. For now though, what we'll do is make our way round the corner and up the flybridge steps to check out this upper deck. Now we emerge into the centre of that deck, And you'll see that we've got a transverse galley directly here, a transverse wet bar. Now that, alongside those steps that we've just come up, pretty much delineates the separation here. We've got companion seating wrapping right around this two-man helm up at the front. Very casual lounge sort of spot. We've also got one of these excellent weighted backrests that you can shift wherever you like just to make yourself comfortable. And on the other side of that division, at the aft end, we've got a really generous size of dinette. Easily big enough for 8 people, I would say, and substantially bigger than the one you get on the neighbouring 4.9, which is kind of squeezed together to a degree compared to this. Plenty of space aft of the wet bar to actually stand and operate the electric griddle and the sink. I think we've got a fridge under there, and there's also space for an ice maker in there if you want it. There's plenty of open, easy access, quick grab storage space underneath these bench seats. And the hardtop is an option. You can spec it instead with a standard kind of bimini. I head to the forward end and point the camera back so you can see the kind of aperture we're looking at there for this sunroof. It's very generous indeed. Well worth investing in, but I do notice the way that the fabric concertinas means that as you walk past, your hair does kind of brush on it, which I find faintly aggravating. And I imagine if that's open underway, we're going to get a fair bit of flapping, but we'll test that out when we get out on the water. It's a very sociable flybridge then, but what we want to do is get down into the saloon and the galley and check out that lower deck, because that's really where this next generation F-Class Prestige flybridge tends to differentiate itself. Now, as we step in, we arrive, as I say, at what they call the Ocean View Galley. It runs transverse and it's slightly sunken. The principle there is that we can look forward to the guys at this saloon and share an eye line with the seated guests, or we can spin ourselves around and look aft towards the cockpit and integrate with the people out there. And actually, they've ramped that up on this particular boat by adding a little bar here. That's optional on the 4.9, and it's a neat little feature just to nail that sense of integration between the two zones. In terms of the facilities here, well, what we have over here at the aft end is a 4-ring induction hob, a good size of stainless steel sink here as well. And just down here we have a dishwasher plus plenty of storage. There's the fridge and the freezer and a couple of fabulous air conditioning vents right here. Very handy when the temperature gets up to 35 degrees as it has done today. Plenty more storage and work surface forward, and a neat little divider that just keeps the mess off the upholstery further forward, but doesn't actually divide you from those people on that settee. And actually, talking of integrating with the people in the saloon, this is quite critical too. Now on this boat, this is an option, this high level storage, and it tends to be spec'd by people who like to cruise long term or long distance, just to give them extra storage options. But for me, it's not ideal. I've cracked my head on it a couple of times, and as you can see, my eye line's up here. So actually it shuts me off a little from that saloon with which I'm supposed to integrate seamlessly. So I would do away with this, open up this aperture, let the views and the light flow, just make it a bit more sociable. Let's step up onto that higher level saloon, past this very neatly placed switch gear on the starboard side, past this door again on the starboard side to access that starboard side deck and spin ourselves around, because this is where the extra beam of this boat really does come into its own. These side decks, they're not particularly generous. They're big enough, but they've certainly wasted no space on them. And this is the result of it. A huge dinette on that port side and a helm seat which can be dropped into the space. In fact, it already has been dropped into the space. So we can spin this backrest over, rearrange these cushions, and what you have there is a lovely little chaise longue for a couple of people on that starboard side to face across to the people on that more conventional dinette. If I take a seat here, one of the key criteria of the modern Prestige design is 360-degree views, and you feel that from eye level. It really is very good indeed. The only point where you're kind of reined in terms of your visibility is here with that big fridge freezer unit. Aside from that, light and visibility is fantastic. It's pretty stylish too. If you look up, you'll see we've got some lovely inset LEDs in an asymmetrical sort of pattern built into that deck head. And there are elements of practicality here too. If you move further forward, we've got this TV that lifts out of here over to the port side. We've got a quite grippy plateau that could feasibly be used for a bit of chart work if you choose. We've got a little trough for your glasses, space for 12 glasses in there. And further forward, we've got a nice big frosted glass panel directly beneath that rate screen to admit maximum light down below. So we'll pop down immediately and see how effective that's been. Now as we go down, you expect it to follow exactly the same principle as the 4.9, and it does. So we come halfway down the stairs continue 180 degrees, they head aft to a lower level. There's the day heads on the starboard side, a couple of cabins down there. But the owner stops halfway down and heads forward. And this is the impact of that raised bow section. It's a really impressive bow cabin, and actually Prestige has quite a long heritage in engineering proper owners' cabins into the bow space. And what they've done here, by elevating the foredeck, is lift the level of the bow cabin so they can keep the hull lines relatively acute, relatively soft riding, but use the more swollen, rounded part of the forepeak for extra volume for the cabin. It really does work well. There's loads of space on both sides of this king-size bed. Some pleasant units on both sides. There's just a bit more space. You just feel that everywhere around this boat over the 4.9. Some power points down in there. Some more on the other side. Decent bit of storage. If I spin around, we also get this just beneath the TV, a little breakfast bench for a couple of people. And here's something that the 4.9 lacks. Behind that door, if I close that over, here's a vanity unit with a little freestanding stool. It's all very low profile, but it works a treat. What a good use of space that is. They've been clever, of course. They've used plenty of mirrors to maximise that sense of light. They've used sliding doors as well, just to eke out every inch of space. And it works very well. The pale woods work as well. Very Nordic style. They make the most of relatively limited space, and the windows are very long, very panoramic, not especially deep, but well sized for a cabin of this scale. Here on the port side is the ensuite bathroom, and it is so bright. There's the frosted glass on the dash top and the port side that we talked about, and it pays big dividends in here. The headroom, incidentally, is absolutely massive. I'm on tiptoes to touch that frosted glass. It's huge. It feels really good. Twin sinks. These are kind of plastic material that they don't especially like. They don't consider it premium enough, so they'll be replaced by higher end sinks in the near future. But to get his and her sinks in here with a pair of mirrors is quite an impressive feat. And if we step further aft, you look forward and think, well, that's a little low level, but then you look down and see that the deck management caters for that. We step down a good 6 inches, I would say. So if I actually pop myself in there as a 6-footer, you'll see that there's plenty of headroom above me. It's got to be about 6'10", I'd think, before you hit that rain shower. Now let's make our way back over to the starboard side and begin heading down these steps. As I say, there's the day heads on the starboard side. Relatively plain. Again, headroom is excellent beneath that helm. Probably 6'7", 6'8". The toilet, a decent size of unit there with storage, a sink. Good size of window there with an open-in port light. And when we get to the bottom, well, on the 4.9, these spaces were divided pretty equally into a pair of twins, one of which was convertible. But we have a twin on the starboard side, and that is relatively compact, it has to be said. So compact that you can see the whole side just kicks in here as you're trying to enter the room. And also, around the back of the door, you'll see they've had to cut away the corner of the mattress just to enable the door to open sufficiently for you to get in. So it's a real squeeze in here, but it's perfectly acceptable as a guest twin, because what that enables you to achieve next door is this. Now again, they've been very clever with the space. In order to give us access here through this door and access to the other side of the bed, they've put the bed on an angle, and that's a queen size bed. You can work yourself all the way around that. That in itself is a very pleasant thing. Again, headroom is really very decent, and we got some more of this lovely inset LED work. The TV on the angle, plenty more storage, and some additional storage just at the head end there above the bed, next to those reading lights. And this is a really major bonus. Your own ensuite running transverse at the aft end with a proper size of shower. Big enough for 2 people to sit down there and have a shower in the morning if you choose. Good size of unit. Toilet behind the door. And next to that, if I open up this door, we've got a walk-in wardrobe with all kinds of storage capacity. And the fact that these 2 compartments run transverse aft of this VIP guest cabin means that they separate this space from the engine room, just to minimise noise from the engines or from the generator when you're at anchor. We're still not quite finished, because as we make our way back out of here towards the bottom of the stairs again, we find ourselves in a little sort of utility area. They've been quite clever with the space, because they left the steps open and used glass panels to really enable that light to cascade down from the screen. It's a fantastically bright spot. If I lift this little section, you'll see that we've got a washer dryer in there. And in here, tucked away next to the breaker panel, we've got a mounting place and a charging point for your Hoover. In any case, as you can probably hear, the engines have now rumbled into life. So it's time for us to go up top and to see what kind of impact all that forward volume and that substantial vertical elevation has on the driving dynamics. Well, we're out on the water now, and we've got some decent swells running about, 2 or 3 footers, the odd 4 footer coming in, the way it tends to happen in this part of the world when the land warms up and the winds kick off a bit. So there's a fair bit for us to play on. Now, in terms of the helm on this main deck, well, we've got a nice adjustable wheel, which is handy because there's not much adjustable about these seats, of course, because they sink down into the space. I'll take that. That's a worthwhile compromise, because this is such a useful feature in terms of keeping this saloon nice and sociable. In terms of visibility, well, we do have some pretty good struts on both sides and a 2-part screen, so another strut in the middle, but actually visibility is pretty decent, certainly on the beam. I'll just spin her around a little because we're rolling about. Make ourselves a little bit more comfortable before we get underway. Stick the bows into the seas. In terms of what we get at the dash, we've got a pair of 16-inch plotters with the engine display in the centre. And in terms of those engines, what we're running here today, and what you'll always run, of course, because, as I say, Prestige picks a power plant and sticks with it, designs the engine room, designs the boat, the weight distribution, everything else around that, is a pair of IPS-800s. That's the D8-600s, so 1200 horsepower in total. We'll get her up and running. And one of the first things you notice is that while there's a decent bit of rumbling at low revs, it actually eases right back once you get her spinning up beyond about 1500 RPM. Drops the decibel readings right down from sort of 86 down to about 78. And it sits there pretty resolutely. As I say, there's a few bumps and swells about today, but there's certainly no need to shout. Running into these head seas is an interesting exercise too, because as I say, the principle here with this Michael Peters hull is that it's relatively rounded, quite voluminous, but at the same time we've got a reasonably fine entry up there at the bow, and I'm feeling that as we're running into these 3-4 footers. What are we doing? About 21 knots, and there's very little in the way of impact, and there's kind of a nice dynamic between the splash defection and the ride softness as well. It's not too wet at all. There is a decent bit of flare up there, as well as a decent bit of ride softness, so we're seeing this water kicked well sideways. We're up to 23 knots now, and this actually at the top end is only a 25 knot boat. So we'll ask her to push on a touch more, up to 3,000 RPM. And yeah, that's a very decent performance indeed. Now we'll spin around to starboard and run across these seas with the swells on our port beam. Swinging around, you'll see there's lots of hill there. You wouldn't say it's a fantastically acute turn, but it's perfectly serviceable. And when you straighten her up, she snaps back into a natural trim very easily indeed. Very little delay, maybe half a second or so. So you don't feel like there's substantial elevation here. In terms of running efficiency, it's all pretty good news there as well. At everything from sort of 13 right through to the top end of 25 knots, we're seeing between 8 and 10 litres per nautical mile. And we got a pair of 1100 fuel tanks, so 2,200 litres in total. That gives us about 1,800 litres to play with. So our usable range is between 180 and 225 nautical miles, which is very decent indeed. What I particularly like is the fact that I can run at 2,700 RPM. I can run at about 21, 22 knots, 22 and a half knots, 23 knots, and I'm still in that optimum kind of cruising band. I'm not burning fuel for fun. It's not going off a cliff. I'm still seeing that range, and I'm still feeling that ride softness. When it's Michael Peters hull and it's zero options engine rig, this boat is every bit as well behaved and comfortable as the F4.9. And to be honest, I expected it to be. The only thing I don't actually like down here at the main deck helm is this. It's a very swanky piece of branded stainless steel, but it causes tremendous glare right up into your eyes when the sun lands on it. That aside, it's a very comfortable and well-appointed spot. But this is a flybridge boat, and this is the Mediterranean, and it is 35 degrees. So what we'll do is head up top and see how she feels from the flybridge. Those flybridge steps are quite steep. So steep, in fact, you've got to be careful you don't wrap a shin on them as you make your way up. But they're certainly secure. And once you're up here, well, a helm is a really pleasant place to be. So we got the lower helm on the starboard side. We've got the third optional helm in the cockpit, that's on the starboard side, so it makes perfect sense you'd have the flybridge helm over on the port side to cover all bases. In any case, let's get her up and running again and get ourselves underway. And straight away, what I really like up here is the fact that I've got all this companion seating wrapped right around me. If you're travelling with your kids, you're on a long passage, you want your family around you, you need to know where they are. This is absolutely superb. I love that. We've also got space here, unlike the 4.9, for a co-pilot seat. These seats do feel a little bit wobbly and lightweight, but I've spoken to the guys here at Prestige about that, and they're looking to upgrade those, like various other elements of this boat, because this is, of course, the first model, boat number 1. Let's get her up to speed again. Now, one inevitable consequence of the fact that we have all this lovely wraparound companion seating is the fact that the wind deflector has to start a good way forward. And the consequence is the fact that I get pretty much whacked in the chest by wind. Not much in the way of protection from the elements. But of course, in the Mediterranean, when it's 35 degrees and the views are as good as this, you don't much care. We only have the one 16-inch plotter up here, but that's plenty. That's positioned directly in front of me alongside the compass. There's also the engine display to the right-hand side, and the zip weight, unlike downstairs, is over here on my right hand next to my throttle and my joystick, which is exactly where I want it to be. Even from the sitting position, you get a fantastic view up here. I can see the bow of the boat beyond that wind deflector, see the way it's interacting with the water shapes, and I can see how effective that splash deflection is from up here. I suspected on the lower helm that it was pretty good, and as I sit up here watching this hull do its stuff at about 23, 24 knots, it's proving to be every bit as effective as I imagined in that regard. Now let's swing around to starboard and run with the seas, because that's often the acid test in terms of keeping a boat dry. we plunge down into a couple of troughs and just see what she makes of it. Well, not a great deal. Again, very settled, really, really user-friendly. The weight feels like it's in exactly the right place. And actually, even though you do have to be relatively active with the tabs, as you'd expect on a breezy day like today with elevation like this, again, it's not a difficult boat to drive and to drive well. Well, that was a lot of fun. Not visceral or hard-edged anyway, more kind of compliant and well-behaved, precisely as you'd expect of a Prestige flybridge cruiser. And we pretty much expected that because it behaves in much the same way as the smaller F4.9 does. So what we really need to think about is what this new boat delivers that the smaller boat does not. And as I say, the design principles are pretty common across both platforms. And yet what you get here that really marks it out is that nice big double VIP cabin with the ensuite facilities down below. That's a major bonus. You also get that fantastic 6-person bow lounge right up there on the forepeak. That's something that the 4.9 lacks. And it also delivers a larger, more sociable, better spec'd flybridge saloon and cockpit. So given that this boat is only about 20% more expensive than the smaller F4.9, a boat which in its own right has the credentials of a clear market leader, you have to say that this new F5.7 is likely to meet with some very serious success.